Cool. Thanks for having me. And for the next 15 minutes, we are talking about handling incidents collaboratively is like solving a Rubik's Cube. And you already heard I'm not an SRE, and I recently joined a company building an SRE tool. And before I worked at a company where I worked with backend engineers as a technical consultant and also developer advocate. So what am I doing here? Well, it was introduced already that I really like the way to enable collaboration among different teams. And while working with backend engineers, I know that it's great that you build microservices and everyone is specified in that one particular thing. But when things break, or for other reasons, when you want to discuss architecture, you still need to find ways to talk about the same thing and to be on the same page. And today I'm talking about how we can bring observability more also into the backend space and what really is needed to enable a better collaboration among different engineering teams. And that's me, by the way. You can find me on Twitter as well. And that's the Rubik's Cube. And if you look at the side of a backend engineer or an application developer, they live on that side of the cube. They live in their own tools. They normally live in their IDE, and they live in the code base with different tools, libraries, and whatever. If we now switch the side and look at the SRE side, we look at different tools and we look at different things. We normally look on the SRE space at dashboards, that's why I put Grafana in the middle, but also like traces, metrics, and logs are important to get information about the systems. Also, I feel from the time I've been now in the SRE space talking to SREs, you do a lot in the shell. If you do Kubernetes, it's a lot kubectl, but also like YAML configuration gets very important in that space. And of course, there are more sides of that cube I'm not discussing. You might have DevOps, you might have a dedicated infrastructure team, a front-end team, but you can see they are like all needed, or the whole cube is needed to run and build the software in the end. And there's always this one side where everyone meets. And I put here GitHub or GitLab. That's basically a way you would put your code base and where everyone kind of is meeting and agreeing that something is going there or is going on there. And for observability, particularly for like backend engineers, but also SREs, it's OpenTelemetry at the moment. So OpenTelemetry is a topic to bring or instrument your applications also in the backend already. But I put those tools on the cube because they don't enable collaboration and communication necessarily. They exist and we meet at those places, but it's not the most appealing for collaboration. So what happens if we have an incident? Well, like a Rubik's Cube, I would say everything is out of order and things are not working as we have defined them to work. And what we want to do at that point is basically we want to bring it back to where it was, so our business is functioning again. And I think it's clearly that it's not enough to look at one side while solving this. It's often related that you have to look at different sides, different components of the software to solve this. And let's talk about observability in the different phases of like observability in general. And I think the first one would be if an incident occurs, we want to resolve it quickly. We want to bring it back to function. And I think when this happens, most of the people agree we have a stressful situation, business is down or something is down. Most teams will be able to coordinate and collaborate with you. And I think that's a phase where it already works quite well. What you need basically is you need to have everyone who is involved or who might be involved in that incident on the same page, understanding what has happened and what are the informations we can get. That's a Fiberplane notebook here, by the way, but you can imagine that happens in your Slack space or in any other tool you use for observability, where you bring in your metrics, your logs, maybe some information from your shell session, everything that is needed to understand what is happening to the system at the moment. And then when it comes to the fixing part, we try to do it as quickly as possible. Sometimes with basic stuff like maybe do a retry or a restart, or if we figure out that a new version of our software is causing the incident, we bring basically back an old version. That's fine, we fix the issue. But that's probably not how we want to go about it further, because the next step actually is that we should look how can we prevent incidents, or how can we prevent what was happening, how can we enhance the system afterwards. And basically, a Rubik's Cube you could glue together, right? So no one can move it anymore. So we need to find the component or components to improve. So for example, if you have an external system you are calling and you have an alert, or you got an alert that you had a threshold with calls that went on a 500 or on a 400, you might think of, okay, maybe I have to look again into retry. And if you look on the prevention phase, as I think as an SRE, what you could do is you could start configuring your service mesh, because in a service mesh you can define retries. On a backend side, you can also define retries. So also the backend engineer would be able to define a retry mechanism in their application code. And I'm not here to tell you the one is better or the other. I'm just telling you, if you have a retry, or if you have retry in the organization, what is important is, what is the best practice around it? Where do you want to configure it? Do you want to configure it on the service mesh side or on the application layer side? Or do you do it in some cases on both sides? It just has to be clear, and that's probably the boring part, talking about best practices, documentation, and how other teams can use your services. But it's very important, because you can note down how to solve or how to use your services, and then it becomes easier. And of course, it's just best practice, because you might have a service or external systems that look slightly different and work with different routes. So best practices are great to understand, but they are obviously not the golden key to everything. And then once we have good documentation, best practices, and also how other teams can interact, the next phase is really interesting. It's the discover phase. So how can we discover alerts in the future, or build alerts in the future, and also have a good understanding already in the application code. And here we have OpenTelemetry, I mentioned it earlier, but now talking to a backend engineer, they might raise a lot of questions. First of all, but what should I instrument? It's great that I have the SDK, but what are we measuring? Then the next question, at least I felt that way when I saw Prometheus the first time, how do I write those queries? And I really would like to understand the metrics, but first I need to get the metrics. So first I need to understand how to write this PromQL. And then the last thing, what is the meaning of an SLO? So if we have defined SLOs, do I understand as a backend engineer what was triggering them? And a way, or a tool that I like to present here is function-level metrics called autometrics, bringing back the idea, or bringing the metrics to the application developer, and bringing you to my IDE. I imported here in my Python project the library autometrics, and the idea on function-level metrics basically is a developer understands the code quite well based on the functions in there. So functions are the building block of the application. And now if I use that library, I can basically go and say, I want to create metrics for my functions. I can decorate it here with the autometrics library. And what it does here is it provides me the request rate, the error rate, and the latency. And I don't need to care about what I should instrument, and also not about writing those queries, because I can basically go and hover over it. And then I should see Prometheus running with a query written for me and an idea how often my function has been called in production. And of course, this is like a link, or for me, that's a collaboratively link for a better collaboration among different teams, understanding the performance really of your application life. So, coming back and summing up, observability among different phases. In the resolving phase, for me, it's like finding tools that bring everyone on the same page so you can work together on the incident and solve it quickly. The second step is find ways to prevent it. So define good standards, best practices, so you don't do things double. And the last thing, in the discovery phase, also find tools here that enable a common language, for example, autometrics. If there are more tools out there that do this, I'm really curious to find out. So if you know something, I'm always happy to learn about them. And then I hope if you have those, you can stay on your side of the Rubik's Cube. But in the end, you also have really good tools to understand the other sides of it and see what's going on. That's it.